Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee on Thursday, 18th July 2024 from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:31 p.m. My name is Councillor Johnny Morris, Chairperson of the committee. This meeting is live streamed from the Council's YouTube channel, and the recording will also be available after the meeting. Subtitles can be switched on, and advice on how to turn these on is set out on our website. Can I remind members not to use their microphones? Can I remind members to use the microphones? And can everyone ensure mobile phones are on silent? In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Turning to the agenda. Item 1, apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Godfrey, for whom Councillor Miller is deputising.
Excellent. Welcome, Councillor Miller. Item number 2, disclosures of interest. Any declarations? Okay, you had your chance. Item number 3, appointment of chairperson. Do we have any nominations?
Chairman, may I nominate Councillor Chamberlain, please?
Okay, does anyone wish to second that nomination?
I will second that nomination.
Okay, any other nominations? I think that's a good choice. Councillor Chamberlain, you become my vice chairman, please. Item number 4 is chair's announcements, which I can go through very quickly. I have no announcements to make. And item number 5 is to note the date of future meetings of the committee, which are currently scheduled for the 26th of September 2024, the 7th of November 2024, and the 6th of March 2025. Item number 6 is to note the audit and governance work programme for 2024-25, which is pages 5 and 6 on the report back. Is that noted? Okay. And then we have item 7, which is minutes of the previous meeting held on the 29th of February. I wasn't at the meeting, but I enjoyed watching it on YouTube, and others were attending. So can I ask if these are agreed as a correct record? Public participation. I don't think we have anyone registered, so I can move quickly on to item 9, which is the Treasury Management Outturn, which is the report which I think has been given by Gemma Farley from HEC.
Thank you, Chairman. So this report fulfils the Council's legal obligation under the Local Government Act to have regard to the SIPRA Code and provides an update on the performance of the Treasury management function during 2023-24. We reported earlier in the financial year that there was an overnight breach of the Council's Treasury management strategy. Other than this occurrence, all Treasury activity has complied with the Council's Treasury management strategy for 2023-24 and all relevant statute, guidance and accounting standards. As we're all aware, 2023-24 has been a higher interest rate environment. Obviously, that has meant higher returns on investment, but also increased borrowing costs to the market. The expectation now is that we will start to see cuts to the bank base rate from the end of the summer onwards, possibly August for that first cut. We can see that these cuts have been priced into the market, with longer duration investments showing a downward curve in return. Table 1 of your agenda, in the report, shows the capital financing requirement known as the CFR and how this has been funded. CFR is spending on the capital programme that has not yet been funded by capital receipts, grants or contributions from revenue. During 2023-24, the overall CFR grew by £11.3 million, which is mostly attributable to an increase in the housing revenue account element of the capital programme. This increase has in the most part been funded through increased internal borrowing, which is borrowing from the council's own reserves. External borrowing is the borrowing that the council has secured with external parties. The total external borrowing held by the council at the 31st of March 2024 reduced by £2 million in comparison to 12 months earlier. This was as a result of the repayment of £5 million of Public Works Loan Board loans at maturity, followed by the council securing a new £3 million PWLB loan at the end of the year. This was secured to meet cash flow requirements. Table 2 shows that the total external borrowing held by the council at the 31st of March 2024 was £159.7 million at an average interest rate of 3.28%, which represents good value for money considering the current base rate. All of this borrowing has been secured with the PWLB. Investments at the same date totaled £12.4 million, which is the lowest year-end balance that the council has held in the 9 years we've been in partnership with you on the Treasury Management function. The average interest rate on investments held at year-end was 5.08%. Investment balances have been reducing primarily as a result of expenditure on the council's capital programme, where internal resources have been used rather than taking out additional external borrowing. During 2023-24, the council spent £5.2 million servicing its debt, which represented 3.2% of its average level of debt held during the year. The council earned £1.7 million of income on its investments, which represented 5% of its average level of investments held during the year. The liability benchmark shown in Table 7 and the chart shown on page 25 shows that the council expects a positive liability benchmark across the forecast period. The liability benchmark shows the capital financing requirement net of the council's resources, and therefore how much total external borrowing is forecast to be required to meet the expected cost of the capital programme. The dark shaded area of the graph shows the external borrowing that has already been secured by the council. Where the red dashed line extends above the dark shaded area illustrates where additional external borrowing is expected to be required. The council expects to need to take additional external borrowing, and this will be considered by the Section 151 officer in consultation with the council's Treasury advisors, Arlene Close, to ensure borrowing is undertaken at the most appropriate time. That was all I was planning to say, but I'm happy to answer any questions if you'd like me to.
Okay, I'll throw it open. Do any members have any questions on this report? Councillor Conwayson.
Excuse me. If my voice goes, I'm at the end of laryngitis and it might just suddenly lose my voice altogether. So, excuse me. Just a first note, I think that the cabinet member named on the report is Councillor Margot Power, I believe.
On page 11, Chairman, it should say Councillor Cutler.
Okay.
Sure,
So that was just a note to note that, so you're aware of that. I think at the end of that introduction, you kind of explained the chart that is, I think, chart 1. I just wonder if you could put that into layman's language for someone who's new to audit and governance, and this is the first time I've seen this. So if you could explain it to me as if I was just a member of the public. What does this all mean?
Okay, so the blue line at the top is the loan CFR, the capital financing requirement, which you could consider to be like the council's mortgage, but for its capital programme. The red line, the red line is where the capital financing requirement has been netted against the council's reserves. And then the dark grey thick block at the bottom is the current external borrowing that the council already has. So then if you have a look at the left-hand side of the chart, where At 2023, the red line is below the dark grey block. That is where technically the council had possibly too much external borrowing. I don't think the Section 151 officer would say that, but according to this SIPFA requirement, where they would like councils to consider working on the minimum balances possible, that's that. But you can see quite quickly between 24 and 25 that the red line comes up above the big grey block. And that means that at that point, there isn't enough borrowing that has been arranged already to fund the capital programme that has been approved. So where you've got the dark grey block and then you've got the red dashed line, this big gap in between, at the moment, that's how much extra additional borrowing that is required to be taken. But this is based on forecasts. This is based on no capital programme slippage. And this is also based on forecast reserves as well. So things can change quite a lot between now and the actual time that borrowing is required. But this is something that SIPFA now asks us to report on every quarter. Is that helpful?
Well, sort of. I look at the difference between the red line and the top of the grey block, and I see a difference which is starts small and gets very big. And I don't know as a lay person how to interpret that as in terms of the risk and downside. So I think Mrs. Keys is likely to kind of help me.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I would add is, as Mrs. Farley has said, what we've done is forecast all of the expenditure to deliver our capital programme. So the red line assumes whatever we've got on our capital programme at the moment will be delivered at the values that it's in the programme at. And the grey block is our existing borrowing. So the gap between the two represents how much more we need to externally borrow in order to deliver that programme. But it includes our council house building target within there. So it's an ambitious capital programme that will need significant investment. So obviously borrowing has risks associated with it, the cost of borrowing, the fluctuating cost of reborrowing, the cost of refinancing the loans that we've already got in that grey block. But clearly every time a project comes forward in a capital programme for delivery or decision making, then we do that risk assessment at the time, and we will look at those risks, we will look at the rates, and we will take that into consideration as to whether we go ahead with it at that time.
Councillor Miller?
I think I'm right that the grey area is effectively mainly the housing revenue borrowing. So effectively that's money we've secured on long-term loans, and the gap is loans that we effectively haven't yet sourced how we're going to get them. So that's the bit we've got to sort out, because the housing capital loans were all sorted out years ago and are gradually coming down, and the rest of it's got to be funded at some point by the same sort of method, I would guess, in due course.
Yeah, and I think it's important to add that any project that goes forward, although we've borrowed internally, any project looks as if we borrowed externally. So, you know, we take into account the need for the interest payment within the business plan. So we built the leisure centre, for example, which cost £40 million, and we haven't taken the borrowing because we borrowed internally, but the business case would have been on borrowing externally at the time. Any business case, and it's one of the problems that we already see in the housing revenue account at the moment, any business case for building houses includes the current interest rates, even though we don't need to borrow. And so viability is proving difficult. So this chart, as pointed out, shows what's in the capital programme, and if it went ahead as planned in the timeframes we talked about. But of course, if viability is not there, we won't do it anyway. So as you say, this change in the chart could be quite different next year. It probably won't, but it'll probably look very similar, but moved on a year, because that, in fact, has looked very similar for the last few years. And we haven't, in fact, as you could see from the earlier part of the report, we paid off £5 million of external borrowing, but only borrowed 3 in that year. That was partly because interest rates were high, and so we kept it as tight as possible. And if we can delay till interest rates come down, obviously it will make things a lot more viable. But it's a mechanism to report that SIPFA recommend that comes into these reports, so that you've got some idea. You know, it's fairly clear within the plans we've got, we will have to borrow up to 300 and, you know, move our borrowing up from the 159 it is now to 320 over the, you know, by 2030, 31, if everything went as planned. But we won't be doing it unless the things that we've planned are still viable and there is still a good business case for them.
So if I could just ask a supplementary on that, as I think I started to tune into how to think about that. So while we may have spent money, which we might need to borrow to achieve that, we will have increased assets in the form of council homes or other assets. So it's not like it's, you know, it's not a big gap that's going spent on other stuff. So I think I understand it now. Okay.
It is borrowing for capital, and as Councillor Miller pointed out, the bulk of it at the moment was against our council house stock, and I think it represents less than a third of the value of the stock. Something like that. You know, we have 5,000 houses. 159. You wouldn't buy 5,000 houses in the Winchester district for 159 million. You just wouldn't. So it's covered.
Okay, go to Councillor Billinger.
Thank you. With the change of government and local authority, new relationships, etc., are some assumptions here and some of the models going to change? Do we know yet?
Thank you, Chair. There's lots of unknowns about the new government, new legislation and new arrangements on local government finance, and we keep a constant eye on all of the assumptions that we make when we're budgeting, when we're borrowing. So we keep a constant eye on that anyway. It's very difficult at this early stage to be specific about any particular impact.
So it'd be correct to characterise this report as a snapshot of the current situation, with on the assumption that everything continues as it is now, almost as a best case scenario. But things can. It's not a projection of we take the worst case and the best case, and we take the one in the middle. It's the one where we take the best case. Is that correct?
It's a projection of the approved capital budget and what the consequences of that are at the 31st of March last, because the end of the year we get quarterly reports on treasury management, so it'll be slightly different each time, and as we move forward. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions or observations on the report? Yeah.
Chair, and that is, we mentioned in the pre-meeting the Arling Close presentation that happens, I think, in October and November time, for which we will have had an invitation today, I think. Can I just say it is really worth attending that. It's Teams meeting, but it's a really good presentation, gives a really good snapshot of what all the economic indicators that go into this treasury management strategy. It's useful information broadly for yourself anyway, but it's also, and it's put across very clearly, so I highly recommend it to the audit committee to attend that.
Thank you. I'll certainly add that to my diary. So, okay, if you have no more comments or questions, we'll note that report and move on to the next one, which is item number 10 on the agenda. It's the external audit plan, which is we have Simon Mathers or Mathers who's come to talk to us. Take it away, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. So just to introduce myself to start with, so I'm Simon Mathers. I'm the new partner for the 23-24 audit of Winchester City Council. I should say that I'm not entirely new to Winchester City Council, so I worked here right about 6 or 7 years ago in a senior manager capacity. I'm joined tonight by Charmaine.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Charmaine. I'm based in Reading office and I'm the new engagement manager for Winchester City Council. Nice meeting everyone.
So the item before you is our audit planning report for the 23-24 year. I should point out to start with that this was written at a point in time. So it was written back in April, and this is the first meeting of the committee that we've been able to present the plan to. In that context, I think it's worth drawing your attention to start with to page 38 of the report, page 38 of your papers, apology, which is our overview of the 23-24 audit strategy. So I'm sure members will be aware of the delays in local government audits nationally and the backlog in delivery of local government audits. So the commentary on that page was all around the action taken by the main stakeholders to try and address that at that point in time. So it talks about a consultation by DLUC, as was MHCLG as now is, on the need to implement legislation to enact statutory backstop dates for all open audits. So those audits would be closed by those backstop dates. It talks about consultation from the NEO on changes to the Code of Audit Practice, and it talks about consultation from CIPFA on changes to the financial reporting framework. So things have moved on, and now we're sat in July. The legislation to introduce the backstop dates was due to be approved by the Minister just before the general election was called. The general election was called, Parliament went into recess, so the legislation did not move. What's the impact of that then on the audit strategy that we articulate to you in the plan? Well, there's no change. So we're talking to all stakeholders, and that's the FRC, that's MHCLG as now is, that's CIPFA, that's the NAO and other audit providers. We're waiting for a firm steer, but the guidance that we've been given and the guidance that's been published is that we should maintain our strategy, and that strategy is to deliver your 23-24 audit on time and to the timetable set out in this plan. So before going through the other bits of the plan, I thought it was important to update you on that and set out that context for it. So moving on to the content of the plan itself, then, if I could take you to page 40 of your papers. Page 40 of the paper sets out a summary of the risks impacting the financial statements audit for the 23-24 year. So the risks dictate how we deploy our audit effort. The first risk, which is a risk of fraud, is misstatements due to fraud and error. This is something that auditing standards require us to do on every audit that we undertake. So this is not at all specific to Winchester Council. Auditing standards require us to be sceptical, and they require us to assume that management will seek to override controls or otherwise misreport financial performance and position. So what do we do to address that? Well, we look at those areas of the statements that are more subjective, that are more judgmental, so key accounting estimates. We also do a lot of testing around journals on the ledger. So journals move income and expenditure and balances around the ledger and therefore the statements. So we do a lot of testing of those journals to make sure they aren't inappropriate. The second risk, which is a subset of the first, and again, a fraud risk, is around the inappropriate capitalisation of revenue spend. So the council, like most councils, has pressure on its revenue budget. It has capital financing sources available to it that it can't use to support those revenue pressures. So, for example, capital receipts, or borrowing, and capital grants. We want to make sure, and in our work, we want to make sure that revenue expenditure is therefore not being inappropriately charged to those capital financing sources. So what do? We look at your capital additions and something called revenue expenditure funded from capital under statute, and test that to a higher level of detail to make sure that those transactions are actually capital in nature and not revenue. The third risk that we have, and this is a significant risk, is around the valuation of land and buildings and investment property. This is always a significant risk. Generally in councils now, the numbers are large, the work is judgmental, it's informed by the work of management specialists, so a professional valuer, and it's subject to assumptions. So what do we do to test it? We test the inputs to the valuation process, so things like floor areas for accuracy. We then challenge the assumptions made by the valuer in the valuation. If we need to, we involve our own valuation specialist to do that. The final risk that you have in the plan is around the IAS 19 pension liability. So again, a very sizable balance in the accounts, and again, something that's informed by assumptions and the work of management specialists, in this case, the actuary. So what do we do? Across the regime, PwC are commissioned to review the work of all local government actuaries. They produce the report that is then considered by our pension specialists, and we follow up actions from that report to be comfortable that the IAS 19 liability, as assessed by your actuary, is accurate and correctly reflected in the financial statements. The next section of the report to draw your attention to is around materiality on page 41 of your papers. So we set out 3 materiality levels. So we have headline materiality of broadly 2.1 million. So if we find an error that's uncorrected, that's greater than that value, it would lead us to qualify the financial statements. We have performance materiality of 1.6 million. So that's the level that we test to. And we have a triviality level of 0.1 million or 100,000. So if there are unadjusted errors that we've detected in the audit above that level that management declines to adjust, we bring those to your attention and you take a view on whether you want to adjust for them or not. Page 53 of your papers, that sets out our value for money work. So this is the reporting by exception that we do on the council's arrangements to deliver value for money. At the time the report was produced, we said that our VFM planning was in progress. It's now completed and we've got no significant risks of VFM weaknesses to bring to your attention. The final thing, no, 2 more things actually, very quickly. So audit team on page 61. So I've talked about myself, talked about Charmaine. And then finally, the timeline on page 64 of your papers. So planning is now complete. We'll do the substantive work on the financial statements in October and November as set out in the timeline, and expect to report to you the results of our work through our audit results report at the end of November. I will stop there and happy to take any questions on the report.
I have a couple of questions, which is I shall let the councillors get their word in first. Councillor Power first.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I move back to page 40, please? The subject of these valuations of assets and indeed the pension funds. This has been the source of delay and additional cost in the past. And it is well known that if you get 2 actuaries in a room, you'll get 5 opinions. And I suspect the same applies to valuations of assets. Is there no light touch approach that can be taken to these valuations to save money and time?
That would require an amendment to the financial reporting framework and the valuation requirements within it. So these are material numbers, they are susceptible to error, they are judgmental. Our regulators tell us that very clearly, and they want an appropriate level of scrutiny and testing of those numbers. So that's where we are in relation to that.
If I could just add a follow-up to that, is when these valuations are made and they're different every year, is just the sort of the random element that they're going to change as different estimates are made, rather than the market itself fluctuating?
So you have investment property, so that's carried at fair value. That is a market valuation. So that is reflective of the wider market for that kind of property. For your operational property, plant and equipment. Some of it is valued at existing use value. So that's a market-based valuation, but it's not market comparators for best available use. It's for that existing use. So it's suppressed somewhat. You have specialised property that's valued at depreciated replacement cost. That is where there is no active market on which to base evaluation. So there you're effectively saying what would it cost to build a modern equivalent replacement asset. So some of it's market volatility, some of it is things like changes in build costs, where it's a DRC valuation.
And Liz has a point here.
And just to add that as a council, we've made the decision to revalue all of our assets every year. So we ask an external valuer to revalue all of our asset portfolio every year. So all of them are tested every year.
So we could be assured that if there are fluctuations over 3 or 4 years, the average of that would be extremely accurate, and the fluctuations would just be changes in the particular circumstances of a particular month.
Yeah, for the market-based valuations, there'll be changes in the relevant market. For the ones that are based on, rebuild cost, it will be changes in build cost that primarily drive the fluctuations.
Thanks, Mr. Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. My question is on the dreaded subject of fees, particularly in the context of the average 151%. I think that is stated in the report and the increase of fees. And I recognise, I guess, my question could be argued both ways, that if there's no further work on the 22-23 statements, then it could be argued that there should be a reduction in fees. But I note in the report in several places, page 39 alludes to a potential audit fee variation. Page 72 has several TBC-sized areas of additional work in the TBC set of total fees. And actually, I missed page 38, implies some further work on the 22-23 statements. So I guess my question is to Ms. Keys as to whether the council has provisioned any additional funds for the audit fees going forward, given the sort of the TBCs and the implications in the report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We put an additional budget aside in February when I brought the budget to council. So we provided an additional £100,000 to reflect the increase in the scale fee that we knew about. I've not made provision for additional costs and unknowns because they are too unknown at this stage, so I'm not able to budget for those. But I have budgeted for the increase in the scale fee.
If there's, one of the things that we note on this is the strategy for 23-24, and you said that the legislation for the backstop hadn't been brought through. So would we be right in the assumption that you're expecting to do a complete audit in 2023-24, and that you won't have the issue of the backstop causing you to run out of time?
So our strategy remains unchanged, and we expect the legislation to be enacted. So the general election has effectively caused a delay. So we're waiting for a firm steer on that. But we've been told that based on the guidance that has been issued, we are maintaining our strategy. So that would still result in a disclaimer of the 22-23 accounts. We would want to deliver 23-24 on time. That's very much our strategy, because we think timely assurance is better assurance, and we need to effect a reset. But that does then create challenges, Chair, you are correct. So challenges around opening balances and how you rebuild assurance in certain areas. And that may take time.
Thank you. Because if it's a situation where it's going to be, you think you're going to run out of time, it's better to know beforehand than it is after the fact. Understand?
Sorry, could you just repeat that?
If you're expecting to have insufficient time to do a complete audit, to know that in advance, rather than, so we can come in. So when you did deliver the audit, we're expecting it to be, oh no, it's not being complete because of the backstop, rather than us being disappointed that it's. I to get disappointment in early.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So what we want to rebuild assurance. So we want to reset and get back to issuing timely audit opinions. That's our overriding priority. I don't think we would give we would be able to fully rebuild the assurance, so there would be some modification of the opinion just because of the need to rebuild it over time in year one. That would be my estimate.
Councillor Cutler.
Yeah, I think just for clarification, by not doing a full audit of 22-23 and just giving the disclaimer opinion, and therefore accepting the council's figures, it means that your starting point for 23-24 is not absolutely assured. And that means that the 23-24 council, though they'll be audited, will have some disclaimers to them. I think, am I right? That's the explanation of them. The backstop relates to 22-23 is basically if they're not done by a certain point, we forget it. They're not done. And that allows us to do the 23, or allows EY to do the 23-24 ones and catch up. So everybody starts on this year, or the past year, being audited. Some councils will have 2 or 3 years, and it will take several years for auditors to be able to know that they've got to the right place, because they didn't know if they've started from the right place because they've missed the gap. In our case, where there haven't been many changes, we wouldn't expect, traditionally we haven't made many mistakes, let's put it that way. So it shouldn't be too much of a disclaimer, and it should, within a couple of years, they should be happy, put it that way. That's what I'm trying to put it in relatively straightforward terms.
Thank you, Kelly. You've explained it on my level, which is much appreciated. Thank you.
Just going to say that is a very clear articulation of the position. So, and at Winchester, it's 1 year of open accounts. At many councils nationally, it's multiple years of open accounts. So the issue is around opening balances in 23-24 and not having assurance over them. And as Councillor Cutler has explained, that will take time to restore.
Thank you. Councillor Miller.
Yeah, traditionally, not having an audit opinion was a pretty bad thing for any organisation, to put it mildly. I know I was an auditor years ago. Technically still am, but don't do any. But what are the implications of not having an opinion last year and effectively having a qualified opinion this year? Can affect anybody's credit ratings, because some councils are in financial trouble, and how will outside organisations know it wasn't a failure of us? On a better description, it was a failure of your organisation to have enough people to do the work on time. I don't mean that nastily, because it's a problem we've discussed many times, but I'm just worried about the impact on us as a council and our standing in the world.
I think it's a fair point and a fair question. I think we need to be very clear on the reason for the disclaimer in our reporting, and very clear on the reasons for any modifications to the audit report that are just reflective of the fact that an audit wasn't delivered in 22-23 from 23-24 onwards. So I do think we need to be absolutely clear on that. This is a national situation, so it's not like it's one council that's standing out for this reason.
Councillor, any sort of supplementaries? Or
That's about as much reassurance as we're going to get, and we just got to hope that we don't get tarred with the same brush as some of the councils who are in severe financial problems.
And to that, sorry, just very quick to that point, that's why it's really important that we do reset. So for those councils that do have those problems, we need to be very clear about that, don't we? And do that in a timely way.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just want to return back to the fees question. Councillor Chamberlain touched on it, but more in the context, I think, of additional things that might come down the line. And I apologise, I missed the part of the pre-meeting, so I may be asking a question that I perhaps shouldn't be asking. But the elephant in the room, on that particular paper, is a very, very, very substantial increase in fees compared with last year. And I just want to understand, as a representative of the public, if you can put it in layman's terms, what justifies such a substantial increase in the fees? Is it that the regulations have changed and there's much more work? Is it that is it some other factor, or is it just that people in your business need to be paid more. You know, that's the way a layperson might look at it and say, hey, my God, you know, this is a very substantial increase. Can you just explain to us? Thank you.
Again, it's a entirely fair question. I mean, I would start by saying that the council procures its audit through a national framework. So there's an organisation called Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited. You'll probably be familiar. 99% of councils are within that framework. You know, that offers economies of scale, and that is probably a more you can't say categorically, but cost-effective way of doing it, because you are offering those economies of scale. In terms of what's caused the difference in fee, well, they run a competitive process, so the market is driving that to an extent, but it is the change in regulatory requirements perhaps over the last decade, certainly the last 5 years. And, you know, some of the points around valuation that were discussed earlier, they do drive a lot of additional time and cost. So it's those factors that have driven the change in fee. The fee, the period of each contract is 5 years. So there's kind of a lag from where we were to where things are now. So I would say, you know, you're in with 99% of other authorities. You've got economies of scale by going through that route and utilising PSAA. The change is reflective of the market, which is reflective of the level of work that we now need to do to be able to discharge our responsibilities.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, it's an interesting point that that you offer us a value for money evaluation of the council, and we just want to make sure we're getting value for money from the people who work out our value for money, basically. With regard to you mentioned the market, given your view in the organisation, is there a chance that this is going to keep on increasing year on year, or that it could go down, or I think Councillor Cutler might want to interject on this.
Well, it's term contract, so the previous 51,000 figure was for 5 years. By the second year, I think we were being told that it wasn't enough and that they'd underbid. So that's why there was the steep increase on the revaluation. It's another 5-year contract, isn't it? So it shouldn't change year on year as the baseline scale fee. The additional work, as Councillor Chamberlain has pointed out, may vary each year, and we have very little control over those costs as a council. But that's the additional cost. The base scale fee remains the same for 5 years.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that reassurance. Any more questions or on this area? Royston?
I'll try and ask another one. This might be my last question. It was referred to that there are valuations of all our assets every year. Now, I can't imagine many organisations sell all their assets in a year. They might sell many, you know, they might sell some, they might sell 5% of them in a year. So what's the logic of doing a valuation on every single asset every year and not doing it every 5 years? And bearing in mind that we all know that property prices go up and down, and you know, you have a win 1 year and then the next year it goes down. And is there value in understanding those movements on an annual basis?
Liz, do you want any information on this?
Certainly I can start, and if Mr. Mouth wants to add anything, feel free to. We do our valuations annually because it gives a snapshot value for our balance sheet as at the 31st of March each year. And we value our entire asset portfolio, because if I didn't have a valuation done as at that point, I would have to justify to the auditors how our balance sheet was not materially misstated by not having valued those assets. So it is simpler and quicker for me to value the entire portfolio, so that there is no question of there being a material misstatement of the balance sheet as at the 31st of March. but it is a snapshot value at that time, and changes between balance sheets and in year, will occur, and increase and decreases in valuations will be reflected in our revaluation reserve.
And we're required to check this because the financial reporting framework tells us to. So the Code of Practice on Local Authority Accounting requires the council to value all of its investment property annually. Operational PPE can be revalued over a rolling 5-year cycle. However, as Mrs. Keys says, for the intervening period, you need to demonstrate that that does not result in material misstatement. So it may well be quicker and easier to take that approach.
Okay, Councillor Miller.
I was going to say, basically, it has to be done because the council got to show a true and fair view, and that's the crunch of it. So we have to do it, and they have to check it.
Yeah, I don't think it factors in any strategy of how we would sell them, because obviously if you try and sell everything in 1 week, we're not going to get as much money as if we spend 5 years auctioning piece by piece. Moving on to the recommendations, should we note the external auditor's strategy for 23-24 and the impact of disclaiming of the 2023 audit opinion? Agreed. And we'll approve the indicative 23-24 annual audit fee. Agreed? Agreed. Excellent. Okay, thank you, Simon and Charmaine. Appreciate you coming. Thank you. Moving on to item 11, which is the certification of claims and returns annual report, which is page 86. And we have Liz, who's going to be delivering this report. I think we'll discuss it.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Terry Horner, our Service Lead for Revenues and Benefits. She's unable to be here this evening, so I'm going to present the report on her behalf. And I thought I'd start off by saying I think this is a really positive report for the committee. During 22-23, the benefits team, for context, processed over 10,000 claims or changes in circumstances, and they paid out over £18.5 million of housing benefit to claimants. So I just say I open with that just to set some context around this. So the housing benefit assurance process, or HBAP as we refer to it, is external audit work that's undertaken to provide assurance to the Department for Work and Pensions on the accuracy of our team's work, because we administer housing benefit on their behalf. So KPMG, our auditors, come in and do their work, and the number of errors that the auditors have found over the years historically have been very low for our council, and they have been reducing over recent years as well. If the auditors find errors, then this triggers them to do additional testing to see whether those are isolated incidents or an indication of wider issues around housing benefit administration. So this report shows that the low level of errors continued in 22-23, and they identified 2 minor errors which are talked about in the report. Only one of those had an impact on the subsidy claim to the DWP, and it was to the tune of £61. And neither of the errors had an effect on the value of housing benefit that was paid to the claimants. So I think that's an important point as well. Finally, due to the reduction of errors in previous years and this year, there was one less set of what we call CAKE testing, which is cumulative assurance, knowledge and experience testing, which is that additional testing that the auditors can do if they find errors. So obviously this reduced the costs to us of that audit and the burden of the work to the officer team as they work with the auditors to have that assurance work undertaken. So yeah, so I would say that this is a very positive report for the committee.
Thank you. I have a question, but I can throw it up to the councillors first. Councillor Powell.
Could we add to our recommendations, Chairman, to congratulate the benefits team on another excellent report? It's now several years, including the enormous amount of money they dispersed through COVID, where they have provided a remarkably sound set of reports on their effectiveness and accuracy. Jen.
Thank you, Councillor Power. My question was going to be quite similar to that. Actually, it's going to be as a sort of comparison, how much of an improvement would you say over previous years in terms of how many errors were happening a couple of years ago?
I don't have the figures to hand, but we are talking about a handful of errors. Depending on the error, it depends whether how much the adjustment is and whether the adjustment is to benefits claimed, which is very, very unusual for us, or whether it's an adjustment to the subsidy claim that we make to the DWP. But we're talking about a handful of errors, and it's usually pence or a few pounds. It's usually very, very low.
But in terms of the rate, here it's used about 1 in 20, I think was, you did a survey of 20 accounts and you found one of them had an error in it. And that's a lower rate than it used to be, or was that the same?
Yes, indeed, that's a lower rate. If they'd found more errors, then they would have extended their testing, which is the cake testing that I referred to, and they would have selected a larger sample, and they would have extrapolated their findings over that.
Thank you. Councillor Miller?
Sorry, it's the same sort of questions we had before. It's taken them a year to actually produce this report because it wasn't finished till March 24. Now, if our external auditors, EY, are actually going to get ahead of the game, they still aren't going to finish our accounts until they've got this report as part of it, will they? Effectively, it's affecting our finances. So unless KPMG can also pick up the speed of their audit, we're still not going to actually finish our audits any quicker.
Yeah, so KPMG did actually finish their work on this at the end of December, but there were questions back and forth between the team and the audit team. So we didn't actually receive this report until March. And again, this has been the first committee that we've been able to bring that report to. So there has been a delay this year.
Councillor Miller, any supplementary?
I mean, it's just a case of, again, we'd be in the same circle of EY, even if they'd done their job, couldn't sign it after this was signed off.
The amount of money we're talking about in terms of the difference between we've been given out in benefit, we've been receiving from Hampshire, is not enough to be of concern regarding the general audit for the council.
No, not at all. It used to be that your auditor would perform your value for money conclusion, the audit of your accounts, and also the housing benefit subsidy claim audit. But through the PSAA contract, the housing benefit subsidy claim was not part of that procurement. So they're separated out. So there is now a difference in our external auditors for the two parts of work.
Okay. I see no more hands up, so we can. Our recommendation is that we consider the attached report. So can we consider it considered?
Great.
Thank you.
Are we adding in our thanks to the team, Sharon?
Can we have the thanks minuted, please? Thank you. It takes item number 12, which is the workforce report, which is on page 93, and we have Rob O'Reilly who's going to tell us.
Thank you, Chair. This is the fourth report that we've done on the workforce as a result of Personnel Committee functions being assumed by the Audit and Governance Committee. So really it's a report on the workforce up to the end of the last financial year, where if there was anything wildly different to the year before, I think the Audit and Governance Committee would be very concerned about that and would want to investigate that. Happy to say that the differences between this year's report and last year's report are very, very slight. Also, for your interest, we include a summary of some key HR activities that we've taken in the last year. Just to sort of highlight some of the key issues, the establishment in terms of headcount at the 31st of March was 446 employees. It was 445 in the report we presented to you last year. So very, very minor increase there. Recruitment retention is gone up slightly, I'm embarrassed to say, because last year I said that I'd hoped it would be down at 12%, but it's actually stable, I think it's fair to say, gone up from 16.7 to 16.9%. So still not at a level where as head of HR I would regard that as a worrying level of turnover, but still I'd like to see it getting closer to 12% over time. So I think the fact that it hasn't increased very much is something we can be pleased about. Then we go on to look at some of the activities that we put in place to encourage people to join us and stay with us in the next part of that report on recruitment and turnover, including our list of benefits, which I think the committee asked for last year or the year before. Moving on to the other key indicator we always look at is our sickness data. Again, very slight, in this case, decrease in the number of days absence that employees take per annum from 6.82 to 6.11, still below the ONS reported 7.7 days. So again, not a level that is worrying. Mental health personnel has moved up to a traditional first place in terms of the reasons for sickness and accounts for just over 16% of all of the sickness absence. Because of that, we give you quite a lengthy list of all the things we do to help our employees with mental health challenges and well-being in the next sections of the report. Moving on to equality, the key indicator that we have to report is the gender pay gap, which is the average pay for men and women in the council. A very slight decrease in the mean gender pay gap from 7.4 last year to 7.3 this year. And then the HR update tells you some of the training we've done. We've done quite a lot of health and safety training in the last financial year. As you can see, we do the annual employee attitude survey, which we'll be bringing reports to you about at the next ANG in September. And we give some other indications there, also of all the policies that we've been updating and putting onto our intranet for managers to use. And at Appendix 1, you have establishment, headcount, contract type, sickness absence reasons, reasons for leaving the council, age profile and ethnicity profile. At Appendix 2, you have a reminder of the core mandatory training courses for all employees that we present. So that's my introduction to the report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, I have some questions, but as usual, councillors go first. Any councillors have a question on this? Mr. Chamberlain?
Thank you, Chair. Optically, one of the things that jumped out to me when I looked at the report in the appendix on page 106, the pie chart has just a shade under 97% of employees identifying as white. Relative to I guess the geographic area from which the employee base comes, is that a representative, fair representation, do you think, or is there something that needs to be done?
My understanding from the census data is that's a fair representation of the Winchester district.
Councillor Power?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm looking at the sickness absence reasons, Mr. O'Reilly. We have made certain interventions to help staff with mental health. Are we happy that that is at the right level, that it is the right sort of support? Or should we be making any changes to that provision?
We are happy that it's the right level of support. I think it's higher than most other councils, certainly other councils that I've worked for. And I know that Jamie Khan, who is our safeguarding and wellbeing kind of lead in HR, is always in touch with other councils and national initiatives and national charities to make sure that we plug into anything that's going on. So Mental Health Awareness Week and so on, he does things on that. I think the stuff we do around mental health first aiders is good. A lot of councils are catching up on that, but that's very good. And with the obviously we have the free counselling service as well, which is a lot of councils have, but that's still an important benefit. I think that we have a lot of we give a lot of help to employees who are suffering through mental health issues, anxiety, depression, whatever, who are still in work. So it's not all about people who go sick. We do a lot of work to try and keep people in work by referring them to the relevant agencies. To a certain extent, that links to our work we do around domestic abuse as well. So in terms of keeping employees in work.
Councillor Corson.
Thank you. You mentioned the annual turnover of around just under 17%, and you would hope to be aiming more towards 12. How does our 16.9% compare with other councils, other public service bodies? Is it par, or is it high or low? And what in your opinion is the single thing the council could do to try and improve that retention?
That's a very good question. Turnover in the public sector tends to vary according to profession. So I think prison service is the highest turnover, for example. And from an HR theory point of view, you say you wouldn't want turnover to be too low. Certainly, if you've got below 5%, you'd probably think there's stagnation and not enough fresh blood coming into your organisation. So usually, HR people are happy around between 10 and 12% as the kind of the golden place to be. But what we'd be worried about, I think, if turnover was out of control, certainly the meetings we have they're organised through South East employers, but other councils indicate that every district council in the south of England is struggling with recruitment and retention. And I think most of them will be quite happy with just under 17%. I think that's an area where most people are at. Some I know are higher than that. So it's something we need to keep an eye on. I think if I was coming back to you saying it was just over 16% last year and now it's 25%, I'd be much more worried than I am. But certainly we mustn't be complacent though.
And is there a specific thing that if you had, a wish, what would be your wish that the council would do that would try and improve that?
Well, the easiest way to improve recruitment and retention is to pay people more money. We've already done that to a certain extent because in about 2 years ago we added an extra incremental point to all the grades, and that was to stop us falling behind other councils. I think that has helped to stabilise the turnover. In the absence of being able to afford to pay much more money than your rivals, which are other councils, because of the financial constraints of the council, then you have to look at other factors, sometimes what's called in the HR theory, the employee proposition. So it's kind of, here's the things we offer you that are different. So again, most councils offer them as well, so we're not complete, but if you don't offer them, so we've got flexi time, we've got hybrid working, we've got a health benefit, we've got generous annual leave, higher than the Green Book, so higher than we're contractually obliged to do. We know from an employee attitude survey we have a very happy, family-like environment here. I mean, one of the things that I'm always astonished by is that 85% of employees here say that they think their line manager cares about them as a person. Now, I've done employee attitude service before, and you'd be lucky to get 30% in other councils on that question. So that's something special about Winchester. I think we need to preserve that, and that's what gets recruitment and retention going. But at the same time, some of our professions in sort of engineering, planning, and so on, if the private sector suddenly picks up again as the economy changes, they're offering sometimes way more money than we can offer, and some people will naturally cross over to the private sector.
Following on from Councillor Cormoison's report, other councils have been trialling a 4-day week. Do you think that's something which might be advantageous for our staff situation?
It's an interesting point. You're talking about, clearly we offer a 4-day week for people who work part-time. I mean, so we offer flexible working. What you're talking about is allowing people to work 4 days for the same salary. So effectively they have to increase their productivity somehow to make that economically viable. The last government was very anti that and felt that it breached the council's obligation to seek best value, and basically sent out messages to say if anyone does that, we're going to send in inspectors to find out what's going on behind the scenes regarding their finances, because this seems reckless to us. Obviously, like a lot of questions with the new Labour government, we're we're wondering whether they might take a more relaxed view about that. And I've noticed that ideas about moving to a 4-day week suddenly start popping up again on the HR kind of forums, and seeing whether that's the way forward. I mean, there's nothing written in stone to say we have to work 37-hour week. A 40-hour week was, when I was a child, it was 45 hours when my dad was a child. So kind of, how many hours you work in a week is not something that could be changed by society. So maybe we'll move to a 4-day week at some stage. I think again, like flexi time or hybrid working, if all the other councils do it as well, it won't be an incentive for recruitment retention, or we'll settle back in the same place again. But the ones that do it now, and the ones that try to do it now, and have been heavily criticised both in the press and by the previous government, I think that you probably will retain some people who quite like saving money for 4 days, but whether you retain the right people is another matter, really. So personally, I'm sceptical about it. I think it seems to me, in the financial crisis that councils face, that doesn't seem to be the right direction to go in. To sort of pay people to save money to do less work.
Thank you. Councillor Miller?
Should we be worried by table 6 about the age profile of our staff? I mean, we were discussing earlier about the difficulty of recruiting people for all sorts of professions. And if you look at our profile in table 6, the vast number of our staff are actually 45 and over, and we're not seeming to recruit very many at the bottom end of the age bracket. So is that going to be an ongoing problem for us? We'll run out of staff because the ones at the top will get older and retire.
That's a very good point. And we have, as some of you will know, we've joined the age-friendly employer organisation. I've sort of taken a pledge to say that we're an age-friendly employer. And I recently went on the first local government subgroup Teams meeting from people all around the country. And one of the things that we agreed to set up was a forum of older employees and also actually younger employees. We haven't got very many younger employees, to see what is it about being younger or older that that basically it's a listening forum really that you'd like to tell the council about. Now, I think for older workers who are approaching retirement or could, bear in mind, nobody has to retire really these days, but people always get, once they're over 55, in a position when they can choose to retire if they feel like it. We probably need to ask them what, especially if they've got the skills we want to keep, what would encourage you to stay. And what we tend to find is that older workers want to work part-time, and as a generalization. So, but quite often managers think, well, this is a crucial job that we really need, and if we make them part-time, then they might, we might be able to get less of this important work done or whatever it is we want doing. But you can kind of notice by your face sometimes, because then people will just retire. So so it's a tricky one. I will look forward to finding out what older workers who are in that position say we could do to perhaps stop them retiring if we don't want them to. But at the end of the day, we're like all of local government. We are organisations that tend to have older workforces. And, so again, it's not something that's a particular problem for Winchester. I think it's true of all councils.
Mr. Chamberlain?
Thank you, Chair. My question is with regards to the equality data, and it's really, is there anything else that we can do to encourage employees to provide data to input into that? Is there anything else that we can do to push on that front?
Well, we send out regular reminders that people should update their data on their employee profile, which includes ethnicity and other data on their qualities data. As you can see, it's only 37% of employees have chosen to do that. So I think the answer is we can keep on asking them, and we can keep asking the union to encourage them to do it, because the Unison is quite keen to be able to data as well. So I think one of the things I can take away from that question is it's probably time to do another reminder. So I'll take that as as an action point.
As a sort of a follow-up on that, I mean, notice that the gender pay gap is 7.3%.
Yeah.
Can I have assurance that's down to the distribution of men and women in different parts of the organisation, and that in like positions, the same skills, workload, and responsibility, the men and women are being paid exactly the same?
Yeah, I mean, since 1970, men and women have to be paid the same rate of pay for doing the same job. And in more recent times, that also is that concept's being expanded to include work of equal value. So, you know, when people say, "Oh, you know, women or men are paid less than the opposite gender," that is factually incorrect, because that would be unlawful to do that. What if you're not on average are paid less, because men tend to be in higher graded posts? Really, the gender pay gap and the concept of gender pay gap was brought about because of bankers' bonuses, where there was a lot of a lack of transparency between people who are ostensibly getting the same salary, but actually the bonuses were much bigger for men than women. And that was a bit of a scandal, which resulted in legislation which has been applied to the public sector, when actually we don't give bonuses and our salaries are all public anyway. So it's kind of, we haven't really got that lack of transparency issue to look at. The question really is, how can we encourage women to apply for promotion so that the gender pay gap disappears? If you look at the list of things that the government recommends you should do to encourage women to apply for promotion, we do them all. You know, flexi time, hybrid working, menopause policy, everything they would recommend, we've already got in Winchester. So I would say, over time, there's no reason why the gender pay gap shouldn't go the other way. It's just, you know, we've got a female chief executive, so I don't think there's anything other than kind of chance stopping the gender pay gap disappearing altogether. With a small organisation like we've got, that wouldn't be very hard to do.
Thank you. It's encouraging if it's going in a downward direction, basically. That's what we want.
Yeah.
That's what we want to see. So any more comments or questions on this item? Okay, then we have recommendation is the report be noted. Agreed? Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Rob. And we now move to the item 13 of the annual internal audit report and opinion, which Mark Norton is going to tell us all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, apologies from Anthony Harvey for him being unable to be here with us. Hopefully I can substitute in his absence. If I could please direct you initially to page 116 of your report pack. It just summarises in there the overall approach that we take to internal audit, and within that it mentions that the primary purpose of each of our audit reports is to provide an independent and objective opinion to the council on the framework of internal control, risk management and governance. So moving down from that, if we go to page 118, that summarises our internal audit opinion for the year based upon the work that we have completed in 23-24. The table at the bottom has 3 key aspects to the message. So firstly, we are satisfied that sufficient assurance work has been carried out to allow us to form the reasonable conclusion on the adequacy and effectiveness of the internal control environment. So that basically means that the majority of our planned internal audit plan for the year, the work that we had allocated, has been fully completed. Secondly, in our opinion, the frameworks of governance, risk management and management control are reasonable, and audit testing has demonstrated that the controls are working in practice. And then lastly, that where any weaknesses have been identified through our audit review, we've worked with management to agree appropriate corrective actions and a timescale for the improvement of those. If we could then move on just down to the next page, 119, that just gives a graphic breakdown of the assurance opinions across the different pieces of work that we've completed. So they amount to 10 pieces with a substantial assurance, 4 with reasonable assurance, 4 with limited assurance, and 3 as summarised below, where an assurance opinion is not appropriate, but it is work that we've carried out that contributes to the council. And then on the following page, 120, it just summarises by each of the key aspects: governance, risk management and control, how they have been covered, and our overall opinion of them individually. Included in that is an actual audit of risk management itself within the audit plan, So we're able to give good assurance on that particular aspect. And then down to page 121 and 122, it's worth noting that there were no audits concluding with a no assurance opinion as part of the work for 23-24. There are 4 reviews concluding with a limited assurance opinion, and we've given a brief summary of the issues that were found within each of those audits. Should be noted that there are 2 of them, mobile device management, which is at draft final stage currently, and tree management, which is at draft stage currently. So the other reviews have been finalised, but not those 2. And then lastly, if I could take you down to page 124, which just summarises our quality control processes. And on bullet point 9, the internal audit performance, the first of which is the percentage of the annual plan delivered to draft report stage. Our target was 95%. This year we achieved 91%, although I can confirm verbally at this meeting that another of the audit reports decision making has since reached draft report stage. That concludes the summary of the report. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
I have questions, but I think Councillor Power goes first.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this question might more properly be addressed to Mr. Howson. In fact, on page 121, we refer to a lack of record keeping in the Corporate Estates Department, but I see it doesn't feature on Mr. Howson's list of things to be done later on in the papers. Can we assume that those systems are now in place and being used?
Liz?
Thank you, Chair. Those of you who were at the Audit and Governance Committee when it last met, I was able to give a verbal update on this audit. Because it had had a limited assurance, it appeared in the monitoring report that we brought to the committee, and I was able to give an update on behalf of the corporate head of asset management, which set out the improvements to record keeping and processes that they had already implemented within the team. So I was able to reassure the committee that actions had been taken and completed.
If I can sort of go on a similar note, the items which have been flagged up as having, like the tree management thing, where it's a draft report and it's incomplete. Can we have that minuted that those are areas where we'd expect that to be, when it's next audited, for there to be no areas of concern?
Chair, if I may, yes, the work continues on those audits, and as they are completed, which is scheduled to be within the next few months, they will be included in the Southern Internal Audit Partnership's next update report. So we don't, they don't fall off the radar. The work will continue until those reports are finalised and published.
Thank you. Councillor Miller?
Looking at the small number of things that have turned up, it seems that generally speaking, our officers are doing a very good job on their keeping of records and finances. So I'd like to congratulate them for that.
Thank you. I'm happy to second that. Is that be minuted? And Councillor Camoisney?
Yes, I would agree with Councillor Miller on that score as well. I've kind of got a contrarian question here, which really was triggered by looking at the pie chart, where we have about 50% is, in terms of assurance opinion, is in the substantial, and then there's another chunk in green and then a chunk in yellow. And as councillors and members of the committee, and there's a natural tendency to try to identify risk and try and squash it down and keep it to a minimum. Is there and the contrarian part of this is, can you over manage risk so that you're doing such a fantastic job, you've got no risk and you've got everything's substantial, but correspondingly you spend money on managing that risk and so on, and you maybe are less agile as an organisation? Is that just like, is that a reasonable thought to have? Or is it better that you really do get that all those items into the blue section where you've got substantial management of the risk? It's like an opinion on that.
Liz, yeah.
You're absolutely right. And I would say that it's dependent on the audit and it's dependent on the environment in which that's happening. For those outcomes which are reasonable, that is an indication from the auditors that they can give reasonable assurance that things are working as they should and the controls are adequate. I don't want to speak for our internal audit team. And there is an argument that says if you've got substantial assurance, then that's over and above what's necessary. I would just say, though, that as part of our TT25 agenda, we're looking at teams, systems, processes, and the controls and the risk and the balance of those within all of our teams to ensure that we're working efficiently and effectively. But I would hate to see some of our high risk areas, cash management, etc., fall from substantial to only reasonable. I would want some audits to always be in that substantial section just because of the nature of that particular service or process.
Please, supplementary or? Okay.
Yeah, I think you're right. There are some processes which are more equal than others when it comes to managing risk, and I guess that's the challenge here, is to identify those and make sure you're doing a really good job on those, and worry a bit less about some others where the consequences are less severe.
Because I found this pie chart very beguiling and sort of eye-catching, but the balance between limited, reasonable, and substantial, that's fairly where we want to be. We're not in a situation where we're trying to get the whole pie to turn blue, are we?
I would say we're not looking for the whole pie to turn blue. Clearly, where there is limited assurance that's been given and management actions have been identified, then the important thing is that they are quickly implemented, and we monitor that through the quarterly governance report that comes to audit governance. So you'll see outstanding actions and if any of those were high priority actions. So I think the important thing that is that if issues are identified in a limited assurance report, that they're actioned quickly by management.
Thank you. Councillor Cutler.
I think this is an interesting debate, and particularly in light of the comments made at the peer challenge, which said we had a very robust process, and then later in their report said, and you might be able to simplify it. And so, to a certain extent, that's exactly what you're saying. And then I said there should be more scrutiny. So it's trying to balance all those things, and I think it's like when we talk about the risk management strategy, we have a broad risk appetite, but then in certain areas we have we're more risk averse than others. And I think on finance with public money, and this is my view, and it tends to be the cabinet view at the moment, on those sites areas we need to be, we need to have a substantial assurance all the time. But when on some other things, maybe reasonable is a better process. But of course, what's key to all this is actually the process of then deciding what needs auditing as we go forward and how many days of audit we need, connected with that. So the limited assurance areas do need to be checked again relatively soon, whereas perhaps the substantial ones less so. But then if they're really key things, they do need to be monitored. So that process of the internal audit plan, which this being a relatively new committee, I think there's a 50% here are new. The internal audit plan that comes in March for the following year is quite key for that discussion about whether we've struck the right balance. I think but for me, having been involved with this for the last 12 years with the audit committee, when we used to have pages and pages of outstanding internal audit actions, and now we have very few, there has been a significant improvement, and from there we need, as you say, to make sure that we're doing the right amount rather than overdoing.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. Do you have any more questions on this report? Then I suggest we go to the recommendations, which is that we note the Chief Internal Auditor's annual report and opinion for 2023-24 as in Appendix 1. Is that noted? Great, thank you. So thank you, Mark, for your report. Moving on to item 14, which is the annual governance statement, page 129 of the Agenda Pack, and it's Simon Howson's going to tell us all about it.
Thank you, Chair. We bring to you every year the annual governance statement around this time. The annual governance statement is a statutory document which explains the processes and procedures that are in place to enable the council to carry out its functions effectively. And it was encouraging to hear in the previous paper the opinion which Mr. Norton explained, because that is an important element to the annual governance statement. You'll see towards the end of the annual governance statement, to just jump around, that has included at that time the draft assurance statement from the internal auditor that the council operates in a well-run way. So the annual governance statement put before you sets out the processes and the procedures that the council follows to ensure that it is well managed, well run in accordance with the delivering good governance documents set out by SIPFA and Solis, last updated in 2016, as indeed so many other councils do, and follows the 7 principles of good governance in local government. The council has a well-established and robust process for updating the annual governance statement. All our service leads are asked to update a statement of assurance around March, April time, where they are asked to look at their individual services, follow a governance checklist, and identify the weaknesses and the risks in their service areas. We then take all of those individual reports and the items in those to consider their effect on the overall governance of the council and their inclusion in the annual governance statement. Before you, in the annual governance statement, looking back, the weakness identified was the continuation of the implementation and rollout of the retention and disposal schedule, which was also included in last year's annual governance statement, and work is now moving at pace to get that work completed, and that is also alluded to in the quarterly governance report. The other governance issues that were included in the previous year's annual governance statement included the Constitution. Thinking back a year, we'd just started on that journey to review and refresh the Constitution. Obviously, a lot of work was done on that throughout last year, culminating in approval and adoption by Council of the updated Constitution in November. So that issue is no longer being rolled forward to this year. That is finished and completed. The other issue in the previous annual governance statement was around complaints, complaint monitoring and complaints handling. I'm pleased to say that there have been huge improvements recently to our complaints performance, responding to complaints within the 10 working days, and that's seen a big increase over the last couple of months. We've also updated our monitoring and working with our service leads and corporate heads to ensure that they've got the tools and the information to understand the complaints that they have relating to their services, that they've got the information to enable them to respond to those complaints. So we have reviewed our processes and updated those with management information. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from councillors? Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. My question, very specifically on page 143, is a series of steps and actions with regards to implementing the retention and disposal policies. Can I just ask, are those on track? The annex kind of implies that work should be underway now and aiming for completion by end of September this year.
Chair, I can confidently say absolutely, so they can keep the documents that they do need to keep. So that is moving at pace, and we are confident we will meet that 30th of September deadline.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions, observations on this report? I think it's a very good report. We have very little to say about it. So move forward to the recommendations that we approve the annual governance statement for 2023-24 as Appendix 1 for inclusion in the annual financial report 23-24. Agreed? Agreed. And number 2, issues arising and actions identified being notified. This is the records retention thing, and the progress against the actions be brought back to the committee as an appendix, as per usual, in the quarterly governance monitoring report. Agreed? Great. Takes us to item 15, which is Simon again on the governance and monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We bring this report to you on a quarterly basis, and it covers a number of very significant, very important governance issues that affect the council and the good running of the council. The report is set into or split into a number of sections. I can go through those sections one by one if that's helpful. We pick up the declarations of gifts and hospitality to ensure that members and indeed staff are declaring properly and in accordance with our guidance, that they are declaring any gifts and hospitality that they receive throughout the year and that a register is maintained. This report brings to you any declarations that have actually been received to ensure that proper accounting records are maintained on those issues. Starting with paragraph 12 on page 147, each quarter we bring you a review of the internal audit reports and the internal audit tracking of the actions arising from those internal audits. So in this report, it shows you the number of internal audits that were issued during the last quarter, that being January to March, quarter 4, and the opinions for each of those internal audits, which were also included in the previous the internal audit annual report. You'll see there that income collection banking, a number of substantial internal audit reports, and also the one there that was limited. We track all of the actions, the management actions that are in place to remedy or mitigate the actions, the weaknesses that are highlighted in the internal audit reports. And I know that this committee pays close attention to the levels of those internal audit actions. And I'm pleased to say that they are very low from where they have been in previous quarters and years at 8 internal audit actions only. The report goes on to give a brief explanation of the reasons for any of those delays and the expected dates for when those actions will be completed. And we always come back to those the next quarter to ensure that officers have followed up or to update members with any reasons why there's been further delay on the completion of those actions. Where internal audit reports have arisen with a limited assurance, it's helpful for members in this report for us to give a brief overview of the reasons, the weaknesses identified in those reports for why that limited assurance was given, and also a follow-up update on the actions that are being progressed to ensure that the weaknesses are addressed. So you'll see in this report, paragraph 13.2, we've got an update on the asset management, corporate estates internal audit, which when it was issued was a limited assurance. Also for the income collection and the information governance records retention. We bring an update each quarter on those limited assurance audits until all of the actions have been completed, and then they will drop out of this report. So as internal audits are issued, if they are limited assurance, we will bring you an update and overview of that and the progress of those actions. This report also provides a quarterly update on risk management on our strategic risks, which are included in the appendix, which sets out the council's strategic risks. The risks are monitored and reviewed on a quarterly basis by the risk owners, and any escalation or de-escalation of those risks is alluded to in this report, and any other significant factors that may have an impact on those risks. Similarly, in this report, any risks that are added or taken away from the corporate risk register through different events are also alluded to here. So it's a monitoring report against our risk register. Paragraph 15 picks up on the progress and numbers of code of conduct complaints, and there's an appendix that gives further information on that on those complaints. At the request of the previous committee, we've included in this paper an update on the TC25 governance and decision-making structures in Appendix 4. So we've got each of the appendices which provide more information against each of those sections that are in that report. I just would like to add, Mr. Norton picked up in his report about a recently issued audit. It was this week, which was relating actually to, I think, the 24-25 audit programme around decision making, that audit was offered with a substantial audit opinion. So I just wanted to, hot off the press, make you as members aware that that's substantial. And coming back to the point that Ms. Keys made around the audits are obviously very much risk-based. That is an area where you really would hope to get substantial assurance decision making, which is a clean bill of health on that area. And we will bring you an update in the next audit report, as that's a Q1 report. Happy to take any questions on this.
Okay, Councillor Power can go first again.
Thank you very much. Could I just look at the last paragraph in 13.2, condition surveys and visual inspections? There is insufficient asset management budget to commission regular comprehensive condition surveys. Now, in my experience of managing one property, if you don't take a condition survey on a regular basis, things go wrong and become more expensive. Has that decision been reviewed for cost effectiveness in the overall management of our assets? Is that a sensible question? And I do apologise that I'd missed this part in your report, Mr. Howson.
Councillor Power, I think the three officers that are looking at each other don't know the answer to that one. You've got a lawyer, a policy and an accountant, and we really need a property expert for that one. So if you'll allow us, we'll come back to you in writing on that one and we'll check in with the team.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to the TC25 governance and decision making structure in Appendix 4. And I admit it may be a question verging on an observation, but I'll ask it regardless. So, given the speed and the importance of which this programme, TC25 programme needs to make progress, optically it looks to me you've got proposals being surfaced up into delivery groups and boards, then going up to the TC25 programme board for certain decision makings, and potentially then being surfaced up to either full council or cabinet decision day or strategic operational decisions. Whilst obviously as a member of audit and governance, I would never suggest bypassing governance in any regard. If decisions need to be made quickly to be enacted upon as part of TC25, does this structure give the agility required to underpin that?
Thank you, Chair, and I'll ask Councillor Cutler to come in after I've given a brief summary, just because he chairs our TC25 programme board, and I'm sure he has some input. I would stress to the committee that the decision making structure for TC25 is no different to decision making for any other area of council business. So the TC25 programme board is not really about decision making, but steering, and operational decisions are made by ELB as they would be for any other area of business. And then depending on the scale and the nature of the decision, it would come up to decision day, cabinet, full council, depending on the scale and size of it. So the decision making around TC25 is no different to anything else. But we do have that programme board in there to help steer the sort of policy making and the options as they are put forward. So yes, quick and easier to implement operational changes would still be decisions at ELB, and we're able to make, ELB meets on a weekly basis and would formally make those decisions as and when necessary.
Thank you. And Councillor Cutler.
Yes, I think the way TC25 has worked, we've taken a lot of the low-hanging fruit, which is easy decision making and sort of low-level decision making. To a certain extent, it's very easily through ERB or even just within within each area of service in some cases, but we will be moving into the broader and the major project element of things with digitisation of various services and trying to make sure they're integrated. And that's the role of the board, really, to make sure that the process is integrated. But at some point, there will be decisions that will require significant investment, and they will be major decisions that will either be at the point that go to cabinet and therefore go through scrutiny, but they wouldn't be the ones you'd want to take quickly. Although going back to the conversation we had earlier before the start of the meeting about the peer challenge, there was some question mark about whether our decision making process just is slightly too risk averse and goes and takes too long. But I don't think that'll be the case here. We have the digital manager in place, and we will be starting to move more quickly on TC25. What we wanted to do here was assure you that the process is very similar to all the major projects, and will be scrutinised in the normal function with the major decisions within it.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. Okay. My question is regarding a progress update on page 150, the overdue action regarding information on the asset registrar, where it says it's currently waiting for a bill to pass through Parliament, and with the general election and the King's speech, I presume that bill is now dead in the water, and we will now be in a situation of waiting for a new bill to be put forward. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I think we will look to whether the validity of that audit action, just to continue to report it as overdue, is sensible way forward, and whether it's practical to us that this one be added to a future audit and we can actually remove it as being obsolete for the time being. We will monitor it ongoing if there's any change in the bill.
So would it be obsolete in the sense that you can do the work now anyway, or that it's not worth doing at all while the situation is about to change?
I think the advice of our solicitor that's involved in this is that it's not worth doing until the advice and the guidance has been given.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Okay, that's so the recommendations are that we note the contents of the report, including the progress against internal audit, management actions, and any issues that have been raised with a cabinet member. Agreed? Agreed, thank you. And we note the code of conduct complaint and the resolution as set out in Appendix 2. Agreed? Okay, so item 16, which is Simon again. What a treat, we're getting so much Simon this evening. It's the Equality, Diversion and Inclusion Annual Equality Report.
Thank you, Chair. The Equality Act 2010 requires public authorities to publish information to demonstrate their compliance with the public sector equality duty and its own equality duties. Cabinet adopted the public sector equality duty for this council back in January 2022, and a lot of work has happened since then. Not least, Cabinet established a member Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Forum, which meets 4 times a year, but also an action plan to address and to progress equality issues supporting the requirements of the Equality Act. Attached as Appendix 1 to this report is the annual Equality Monitoring Report for 23-24, which summarises the work undertaken across the council during the year, demonstrating compliance with the requirements as set out by the Equality Act. Fundamentally, at the time that the public sector equality duty was adopted, the council set out to follow and to work towards completing the LGA Equality Framework document, which was attached to the public sector equality duty report. In that report, there are three achieving levels, if you like, that authorities are encouraged to work towards as achieving, developing and excellent. The council has really used that framework to guide its work on equality, diversity and inclusion issues over the last 18 months. And that really is the focus, the framework of Appendix 1 that's brought before you this evening. So the report brings an update on all the good work that the council has done, recognising that the council has self-assessed as encouraged by the LGA to be at the developing level, to have achieved that developing level, and now moving on to the next level, which is achieving. We're already working on an action plan, setting responsibilities, a timeline, and what it is we need to do to actually work towards that achieving level. We will bring a report next time with an update on that progress, but for the moment, the council officers have self-assessed us as at that developing level against that LGA framework, which is really setting that framework and that guiding document for the work under equality, diversity and inclusion. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions? I have one question, which might be for Councillor Becker, I don't know, which is just that we are currently compiling data on the diversity of our current workforce, and it's just to ensure that that information is voluntary and anonymised, and in the event of a member of staff leaving, that a discrepancy in that data wouldn't then tell us something about the person who's left.
It's a shame that Mr. O'Reilly has left already, because he is really the person to ask about this, and he alluded to the collection of the equality data in his report and took away the action that we will ask again. It is completely voluntary for employees to provide their equality data. They are under absolutely no obligation to provide it, and Mr. Howson and I had a discussion last night about the way in which those questions can be asked. So even if someone chooses to complete the data, they do not have to. There may be specific questions within that they choose not to answer, and that will be entirely within their gift. So yes, be assured that it is completely anonymous, and I'm sure we will do our best to make sure that any discrepancies or changes wouldn't inadvertently reveal the identity of a particular person. I doubt that would be possible to do, but we will raise that with Mr. O'Reilly and make sure that can't be the case.
Any other questions on this report? The recommendations are we note the council's self-assessment of achieving the developing level of compliance against the LGA equality framework for local government. Agreed? Agreed. And we note the council's equality work undertaken during 2023-24 and notes the intention to work towards the achieving standard of the framework. Agreed? Okay.
Can I just pass on my thanks to Mr. Howson and the team, because they do such an impressive job in this area that has been recognised in the peer review, where it was identified that the whole of the staff of the council across all the departments are aware of the equality and diversity focus of this council. And that hasn't always been the case. It certainly wasn't the case when I joined the council. So I'd like to thank them for their unwavering support and effort in this area.
Thank you. Could that be minuted? And thanks. Okay, and thank you, Simon Hudson, for all your reports. Much appreciated. And item number 17, which is the final item on the agenda, and it's a sneak preview of the annual financial report of 2023-24. It's a draft, and this case, please brief us on it, please.
Of course, yes, thank you, Chair. So yes, this item is the draft financial statements, the draft annual financial report, including the financial statements which were prepared by the finance team and published in accordance with the statutory deadline by the deadline date of the 31st of May this year. It's a huge amount of work to pull together this information in that very short window. And the team managed that despite knowing that our auditors wouldn't actually be in for months to look at our financial statements. At this stage, I bring them to the committee for information only. I have signed them off as being a true and fair view of the financial statements of the authority as at the 31st of March. And the auditors will now do their work, and the auditors will bring their report to this committee with the findings of that work later in the year, when I will bring the audited accounts to you, and you will be asked to authorise those for issue. So also sign those off with me. So at this stage, they purely are for noting. I'm happy to answer any questions if you do have them, but I will make sure that you have some training on the financial statements and understanding what they're telling you before you're asked to approve them later in the year. So I'm organising that training for you at the moment.
Okay, so do we have any questions from councillors on the draft report? So I see shakings of heads and stuff, so I think everyone's looking for, Councillor Morrison.
Excuse me, try and snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. You meant it, I could probably find the answer to this in the work plan, but rather than skip back, what you said, it will come back to this committee as an audited report later in the year. Is it this calendar year, or is it going to be a bit like last year's where they're delayed?
I would ask colleagues just to check where it's been scheduled on the work plan. Is it for September? 6th of March. But it is dependent on the auditors having completed their work. You're right, not last year's accounts, but the accounts before, we had to keep delaying the audit committee that they came to because we required the auditors to complete their work before we were able to take the next step. So it is dependent on them completing that work and the timetable that they're working to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cutler, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, I think last year you had a very effective open session for councillors to come along and go through and understand the financial statements. I wonder if it's worth doing this sooner rather than later while they're relatively fresh, and also because it gives, perhaps it might give a wider interest in the budgeting process later on. So that actually, if we could brief on it sort of in September rather than in sort of February, March time when we're already dealing with budgets, it might just stimulate some interest in the budget setting process, which we always try to be as open as possible about, but it's actually quite difficult to get member engagement to a great extent on it. So that was just a proposal. I think we again, pre-meeting, we raised the fact that the narrative statement in this is a really good overview of what the council does. And again, I think that's by going through that sort of fairly publicly at an early stage is quite useful.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. Councillor Miller.
I think that's a very good suggestion, particularly given how many new councillors we've got. I mean, public sector finances are a different world to the rest of the finances out there, and I think a good explanation from the offices is very helpful for people to have a look and try to understand and have time to ask questions, particularly later in the year when we might want to be querying figures. So I think it's a very good and sensible suggestion.
Thank you. I completely agree with Councillor Miller, and I think it's a valuable resource, and it's very good that we have this draft report, and it's available on the website, and it's available to the public and all members to spend the next 6 months or however it is going through the fine-tooth comb, as well as it being audited, so they can see what we're doing and they can see our priorities and the narrative of how this council is working. Councillor Cutler.
And of course, the other point is that because it's set out in terms of the council plan, and we will be revisiting the council plan this year, I think again it's useful seeing where we are in relation to the current council plan. That narrative statement is a very good explanation of that, and it will help inform the discussion on the next 5-year council plan as well as the budgets.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. Yes, it's incredibly useful and much appreciated at this stage. So we'll just say thank you for that. And we will note the draft report. Is that agreed? Agreed. There's no more items on the agenda, so I think that's this meeting is concluded. Thank you very much.